Divorce happens. In fact, it happens to almost 50% of first marriages. So let's talk about it. Welcome to Divorce Happens, a podcast to educate, inspire, support, and yes, make you laugh through divorce and beyond so that you can start fresh on the next phase of your journey. Remember, divorce happens, and then we start fresh.
You get divorced. You get divorced.
Getting divorced?
I'm getting a divorce.
You're getting a divorce.
Because she's getting a divorce.
So what if I get divorced?
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Divorce Happens, the podcast where we support you before, during, and after divorce with education, inspiration, and of course, a little bit of laughter because divorce happens and then you start fresh. And we're here again with one of our amazing Fresh Starts experts, Melissa, and I brought her back specifically because this is a question I get from a lot of people I talk to in my divorce consults. And I'm going to have her introduce herself, and then we will talk about the question. So, Melissa, who are you? Where are you? What do you do?
So my name is Melissa Zimbelman, and I live in Las Vegas, Nevada. I do real estate and property management here. I've been licensed for 23 years, and so I've kind of seen it all. And we help a lot of clients who purchase, sell, invest, rent out their properties. We've also internationally invested. We own a home in Spain. And so we help a lot of clients now who are also looking to invest internationally, kind of for what their future might lead to. So that's who I am.
Yeah.
And glad to be here again. Thank you so much.
Of course. So one of the questions I get a lot is like, I'm selling the house in the divorce. I'm going to be getting a little bit of liquid, assets from the sale of the house. Do I buy a new house? Do I rent a place? Do I buy a place and rent that out and live in an apartment with the kids, right? So what, we talked a little bit for a second. Do I rent out a room in my house? Is that a good idea, right? Things like that. So what would you say are the best options, right? So let's just talk about, there's mostly, women who are trying to figure this out after a divorce. If you have some money that, you are ready to invest in real estate or invest in yourself, what does that look like?
Well, and so I will tell you that I got some really good advice almost 30 years ago from a mentor who came to me and said, specifically about running a business. But I think kind of in today's world, we're almost all running a business of some sort, even if it's a side hustle, as an example. And that person said to me, you really need to have this triangle of support, which would be a great CPA, a great trust attorney, and also a great financial planner. And so what I would tell you is, I'm going to have some advice. I'm going to have some suggestions of things that have worked for us and have worked for clients. But you really need to probably go seek some help first on some things like from your CPA, from a financial planner. If you don't have a trust in place or a will in place or anything like that, be thinking about that too, because especially when you're starting fresh, there's a whole new set of things that maybe you didn't consider that you'll be doing on your own. So that's kind of the first thing.
Yep, love
but
that.
in that, your financial planner may say to you, okay, so you're getting $200,000. I think you should take 30,000 of this and invest in some stocks or put some money in a money market or something like that for, to kind of have that safe, easy investment that is going to be long-term. And I always think you need to diversify. So as much as I love real estate and I say all things real estate are awesome, you really do need to diversify. So it may make sense to do that first. Make sure you don't have unknown tax implications coming from that money that you're going to get from the sale or from your divorce situation. Make sure that for sure, because I've had people who've gotten caught off guard by taxes. So find all that out first. And then and then I've also had people come to us and say, I'm going to have this huge amount of money, but I really need to be showing a loss. That's very confusing to most people. And was confusing to me the first few times to say, I need to make this investment, but I need it to be shown as a loss due to our tax situation. So that's why it's important, because I'm going to tell you all the things to make you money, but you may not always want that to be on your books that way. So
Mhm,
consult
that's important, yeah.
consult your professionals.
Yes, and we
Super
have
important.
we have, amazing CDFAs and tax people at Fresh
Awesome.
Start, so you can go over there and
Awesome.
find them. And I will say too, like, having gone through this myself, it's not just the house and the money, but it's your health insurance. It's, like, all these other stuff that and I remember when I sold my house, like, I'm in New York State, like, there's a certain amount of, like, house sales you can basically have before they start taxing you. So, the first one, I think you don't get taxed on, and the second one you do. So, it's you really wanna have people that know what they're talking about in your state for sure.
Totally. And that's important because there is capital gains and different things too that can just cut your knees right out from under you and you don't want to be caught off guard. But so let's say you've determined you've got this X amount of dollars that you'd like to invest. So there's lots of opportunities. So there's all kinds of things where you could actually even now put a small casita as an example in your backyard or in the back part of your property and rent out a small, almost like a tiny house is what people
Mm,
are doing. And so there's a lot of states that are now allowing that because they're saying, hey, people have larger lots, they have the space to do it, but they don't necessarily want strangers in their house,
mhm,
which
mhm,
I feel better about that than I feel about having a stranger in a house. I will tell you that I have senior and single lady clients call all the time and say, hey, I got this larger house because I thought my kids would come more. They're not. What can I do with this extra space? Should I put an ad on Craigslist? Should I put an ad? And it scares me to death because I always
mhm.
think that, even the most nice looking
Lovely.
stranger can turn
Yeah,
out to be a true crime novel. So
yeah,
be super careful as far as doing that. I feel like, it's one thing, honestly, truly, for men to do that, but women in particular, I always worry that all of us feel like we can trust our guts and go with it, but it may not be the best idea. If
yeah.
you are looking to do something like that, there are websites where you can run background checks, and I would recommend doing a full background check if you're ever going to do anything like that, because everybody seems charming until they don't. And my concern always is at 2 a.m., you don't want to see them standing over you. And
Yeah,
so those are the things that scare me to death.
yeah.
So that being said, there are lots of different kinds of investment properties when it comes to, condos that you can purchase and rent out that would be a smaller investment, all the way up to we have some investors now that are buying, let's say, $1 million to $2 million homes in Las Vegas and renting those out.
Mm,
And those are renting, let's say, somewhere between $5,500 and $8,500 a month. So the
right,
numbers have to work, and that's
right.
not great for everybody. But that is an option, and I think most people always thought, "Hey, I have to buy a tiny rental, and then I'll, try to make the numbers work." But there is options for rentals kind of in all sectors,
Mm,
and it also doesn't have to be in your market.
right.
So, I've got a lot of people who invest in Las Vegas knowing that about 50% of our homes are rentals and that we tend to be a very transient, state.
Mm,
People come here for work. People think they're gonna move here and can't stay here, as an example, because of gambling and drinking. And
mm,
so the reality is it's a great state to invest in as far
mm,
as for rentals. So it
interesting.
doesn't have to be in your home state. There are lots of
Mm,
states in our country where the cost of purchasing is much lower. The cost of carrying is much
mhm,
lower. So as an example, New York, New Jersey, all those places where your property
mhm.
taxes are
Incredible.
ridiculous.
Yeah,
Ours here are about 1% of the sales price.
wow.
So if you think about having $5,000 a year in property taxes instead of 10, 20, 30,000 a year, it really is just going to depend on the area.
Mm,
And again, hire a property manager. So,
yes.
have someone and interview a lot and ask a lot of questions and look at all the reviews, do all of that because the lowest price is usually not the best one. If we're being honest, you usually
Mhm,
get what you pay for. So make sure you're checking into that. And then you're asking a lot of questions about what are additional fees I'm going to be charged? Am I going to be charged for postage? Am I going to be charged for preparing my 1099s at the end of the year? Am I going to be charged when you go to my home and do an interior inspection? How about, going to eviction court, going to an HOA hearing, calling a home warranty? You really want to ask a lot of questions. And if you really don't know exactly what to ask, you can reach out to myself. You can reach out to anybody who's on Fresh Starts. and just
Mhm.
ask a lot of questions, because I feel like the more information you have when you're starting that process, the better. I
Yeah.
feel like people don't ask enough questions, and then a year later, they've learned a lot of really expensive lessons.
Yes.
So,
You just blew my mind with this concept of purchasing a place outside of your state and using that as an investment property, because there's no way I was gonna purchase a place in New York, but I'm like, "Oh, wait, she just said I could purchase something somewhere else and
anywhere.
hire a property manager." That I never thought
Anywhere.
of that.
Well, and that's how we do our property in Spain. So again, even on a flight, we're 14, 16 hours
Right.
from that home, which sounds super scary to people. But we found a great property manager there. So we use it twice a year. We go for a month at a time.
Mhm.
The rest of the time, that person rents it out. They
No.
handle all of the routine maintenance. They handle my filing of taxes. They handle my, pretty much everything. And so for us, it allows us to have that property that we want to go to
Right.
and that eventually, hopefully, we'll retire to is the
Right.
goal. But in the meantime, it is paying for itself. And that was the goal. So that may be something too about the investment of, hey, I live in New York State, but I think I want to retire in South Carolina. I'm going to buy a property now, go ahead and rent it out for the next 5 years until I'm
Mhm.
done working. And then that will be sitting there. And IRS allows for a few interesting things, one of which is that you can visit an investment property twice a year and have it be tax deductible while
Oh.
checking on your property and doing maintenance or anything that needs to be done. So, if you know that you really want to go to South Carolina twice a year too to check on your rental, that's an option you can do
Wow.
too, and the IRS allows for that. So, there's some cool options. Another option that people seem to consider a lot is, hey, maybe I'll go in with my three best girlfriends and we'll buy a property in Cabo. So, I know you're going to know what I'm going to say, but
Mhm.
just be careful about who you pick as your
Yeah.
investment partners, because when you're not married to these people, no court can make you do anything.
Mm.
A court, when you're dissolving a marriage, as everybody
Mhm.
knows, can say, hey, what did you guys come up with on how we're liquidating this property or
Mhm.
what we're
Mhm.
doing? When you're not married to those people, there's nothing that the court can force to have happen. So just be
Interesting.
careful when you're picking your investment partners, because it may end up in a situation where you end up cashing out to get
Right.
away from them because it's a nightmare. So
Interesting.
just be careful.
Fascinating. Okay, so a couple of questions for you. So let's say that you do have some money and you are like, I listened to this episode of Melissa Zimbelman and I want to do this, right? I have $50,000 I can put into a down payment. Then you have to figure out, or you would work with a property manager to figure out what the rental fees would have to be?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And
And
then
so and
yeah,
then that would gauge kind of which property to purchase. So
right.
if you had X amount of dollars, you needed the numbers to pencil, they're gonna say, "Hey, you need to buy a 500,000 or under property.
Right.
In this particular area, it's gonna generate $3,000 a month. By the time we take out taxes, insurance, home
Right.
warranty, things like that, you're gonna have this $150 a month that is your net." Then you have to decide, and I
Right.
would do it with your financial planner.
Yep.
Hey, is that the biggest bang for my buck?
Right.
Is the equity I'm now gaining because I own this property and it's sitting there cooking, is what I call it,
Right.
earning
Right.
you equity. Does that make sense? So I think the other thing too would be to look at some history and some trends to figure out if that property you're purchasing is going to continue to appreciate or if it's kind of topped out.
Mhm.
Is it older and it's going to need a bunch of maintenance? All of those things do have to play into it. And then you do need a little baby slush fund, because
Right.
even as your property manager, if I call and go, hey guys, we just had a rainstorm, only happens twice a year here, but we just had a rainstorm. There's going to be $1,500 worth of roof work and you haven't planned for that.
Right.
You don't want to send yourself into a spiral.
Right.
So the biggest thing is having that little slush fund for your property management. And that can be in an interest bearing account. So at least it's making you some money and that's great. But you really need to have that because you don't want to be caught off guard or be totally stressed out because of a rental.
Right. That makes total sense. And what does it look like to hire a property manager, like money wise? Is it monthly you pay them or is it different?
Right. So basically when you first start with them, there'll be a few opening costs and it's different kind of everywhere. For us, we have just a small startup fee.
Mhm.
We have an emergency fund of $250 is all it is that we keep in an emergency fund. That's your dollars, but we're holding on to it just to make sure if there is an overnight emergency, I don't have
Right.
to call you because that's the
Right.
goal.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we charge a certain percent per month. And
Got it.
so that's of the collected rent. So until you have a tenant in there, you're not paying anything. But once the tenant's in there, then when the property manager collects that rent, they're going to take a portion of that and send you
Mm,
the rest, is typically
okay.
what happens. And so it's not a lot to start that process. The bigger thing is just making sure you have the right one, which is
It's
important.
yeah, totally. And it's fascinating because you really could, if you were smart with this whole process, could basically put the down payment somewhere and then the mortgage is paid for right by the rent, especially in a place with high turnover for places. Yeah.
With high income
Yeah.
on the rent.
Right.
Absolutely. We have most of our properties are cash flowing for the owners,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
great. Depends on when you bought it and what the
Right.
market was doing at that time,
Yeah.
but there is opportunity there for sure.
I love this conversation because I feel like so often women feel so stuck like after a divorce, but there are options. Like you just have to think about how you want to spend your money. And if you alluded to this before, but if you do want to like live with a friend, and let's say you have another friend that's a single mom or whatever,
Yeah,
renting would be the best option for that.
I think so. Just things change. I mean,
Yeah.
if your best friend meets someone and
Yep.
all of a sudden they say, "Hey, we are moving to Cabo. We
Right.
finally made it. Off we
Right.
go."
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're stuck with a huge mortgage you hadn't planned on. That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to talk about, because it's starting to come up more and more, is that we've got these aging parents or
Yep.
aging grandparents, and they have this little nest egg that they knew that they would be giving us at the time of their death.
Mhm.
We're starting to have more and more of those parents and those grandparents come to us and say, I'm willing to put the down payment down for my child. I'm willing to put the down payment down for my grandchild. I don't want to wait till I die to do that.
Yeah.
They need the help now. Housing's more expensive than ever. I'd like to help them do that now. There are ways to do that. The
Mm.
lenders want those funds to be gifted in a certain way,
Right.
and they want it to be traceable to make sure it's not something sketchy.
Yep.
But I will tell you that we're seeing that a lot. And I think that parents and grandparents worry a lot about how their
Mhm.
kids are doing and how their grandkids are doing.
Yeah.
And they know that if they can buy a house now, start building their equity, they're going to be in better position than literally lighting that rent on fire for however many
Mhm.
years.
Mhm.
And so, that's always kind of an uncomfortable conversation to start with your family. But
Right.
what I've been saying is go meet with a lender.
Yep.
Have the lender tell you this is the amount of money you're going to need to put down. This is the amount that your closing costs are going to be. If you buy your interest rate down, this is how much you will save over the long haul, and get those figures together. Because
Mm.
if the lender says, hey, if you had $100,000, you would actually spend $400 less a month than you're paying now in rent,
Right.
and you'd have an asset.
Right.
It's easier then to go to your family members and say, hey, this is something I think I'd like to do. Would you consider giving me my inheritance early rather
Mhm.
than waiting until you pass? And that conversation's coming up a lot now.
So
We've got a
interesting.
lot of kind of that baby boomer generation
Yeah.
that's also selling their homes,
Mhm.
and they have that cash that they
Yeah.
could contribute to family members and things like that. So that is an option. And again, your financial planner can help you walk
Yeah.
through what that looks like for taxes and
Yep.
all of that. But that's an option out there. We're seeing
So
that more and
interesting.
more.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. And the other thing I was thinking when you were talking is if you can visit your investment property twice a year for a single mom or for somebody maybe that's on a low budget, you could use that as a vacation
little
twice a year.
vacation,
Right.
totally.
Yeah.
So basically, even if you had to fly there, so
Right.
you'd have your flight costs, you'd have hotel because you're not staying in it, it's rented.
Right.
You have hotel, you'll have, they won't
Interesting.
let you write off food because you're going to eat
Okay.
food no matter where you
Yep.
are in the
Yep.
world. But if your flight cost and your accommodations could be written off twice a year on just to go see your rental, that's pretty great.
It's pretty
So
smart. Yeah.
there's some
Yeah.
stuff.
I love that. This is so much information in this podcast episode. I love everything you're saying. I would love to do some stuff with you that we can get some support together for people on questions to ask a potential property manager because I think that it's, of all the things to invest in, I think real estate is probably one of the better things to invest in.
Yeah. I mean, statistically, over the years, it
Yep.
definitely, I mean, most people build their wealth with real estate.
Yeah.
And generational wealth has been built with real estate. So the
Yep.
reality is, it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be sexy. The reality is, there's lots of tiny places all over the country that people are renting. And so it makes sense to at least educate yourself in those areas, connect with professionals who know what they're
Mhm.
doing,
Mhm.
and then let it ride.
Yeah.
I tell my clients all the time, I hope we don't have to talk. I hope
Right.
literally I am depositing money in your account every month
Yep.
and that everything's going so smoothly that
Yep.
I'm talking to you once a year to give you a huge hug, tell you how much I appreciate you, and that everything's going really smoothly.
Yeah.
That is the goal of a great property manager, is
Yeah.
that you are not worrying, but that I'm making you money.
I love
So
that.
that's the
Love
goal.
that.
Yeah.
Love that. And I'm so fascinated by the tiny house thing too.
Yeah. So they
That's
call
really
it an
cool.
ADU, an
Okay.
alternate dwelling unit is
Okay.
what it's called. And so California has done that. And a lot of these places, it's because they're high density
Mm,
and ultimately they know there's not enough housing. So
okay.
they've said, what can we do to start allowing people to offer additional housing where they're already at? So if you Google that for your area
Mm,
and see if
mhm.
that's currently available or coming, because it's coming in a lot of places as well,
Mm,
then that will give you an idea. And then there's tons of information, of course,
yeah.
online about where you could buy these properties or these units.
Yep.
They're repurposing a lot of things like storage containers
Yeah.
and things like
Shipping.
that, like
Yeah.
shipping containers is what I mean,
Yeah. Mhm.
and turning them into these tiny homes.
So
So
cool.
it's not a huge investment.
Yeah.
We actually know of someone too who bought a travel trailer, so
Mhm.
like a fifth wheel,
Yep.
and they use it a couple times a year, but they're on a large property. So they actually park it in their backyard and have a cute little outside space.
Yeah.
They rent it out
That's so cool.
and it's in their back place and it rents like crazy. They're
Yeah.
actually in Atlanta and they're allowed to do that. So there's lots of options.
I love that. Think
There
outside the
really are.
box. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you could have a little, like, single mom community of tiny houses.
totally.
It's pretty
Yeah.
cool. Well, we appreciate you so much, Melissa. This is literally a wealth of information. I'm so excited to share this podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Anything anybody needs, let me know.
Divorce Happens is produced by Fresh Starts Registry, the only divorce registry platform for everything you need to begin again, including home items, hype team, and everything in between. Remember, divorce happens, and then we start fresh. We're here to support you before, during, and after divorce. Head to freshstartsregistry.com for more info.